Hey, welcome to More Than a Refresh and another T3D session. Our guest today is Andrew Smith. He is one of our engineers at Command Prompt. Andrew, I believe you wanted to talk about code generation.
Code generation's been a major part of computer science for 70 years. It started out with macros and assembly language as a way to create boilerplate text. I mean, assembly language had an awful lot of boilerplate. And a classic example is the swap operation, where you have two variables or registers and you want to swap the values. And if you have A and B, you always need a third temporary one, call it C, and it's just C equals A equals B equals C. And
that sounds a little like Pythagorean theorem to me.
Yeah. Well,
A squared B squared equals C squared.
It's a simple thing, but it saved a lot of time. And just the whole idea of being able to just produce boilerplate at will with a simple keyword is very powerful. And eventually that got supplanted by compilers. But of course, compiled languages have macros as well. I think most people would be familiar with the define construct in languages like C, where it's the mechanism in C for defining constants, but it's actually a macro, and you can define that identifier to be a whole body of text with parameters rather than just a constant. So that still serves the function of boilerplate, but because of the way it's implemented via a preprocessor, you can do some much more powerful things with it. You can use it to create effectively a little relational database at compile time, and can generate all sorts of amazing code with it. A good example might be you want to create a table of strings, and you need to look up the values of the strings, and it would be really nice to be able to reference the strings by some meaningful name rather than just a number, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you do is you put all your strings in a file which you're going to include, and you wrap the strings in a macro body. Just call it string name, and it has two parameters: symbol name and the string value. And then in your code, you define a macro for the string part, and you include that in an array of strings, and that defines all your strings. Then you undefine that macro and you define it again, this time to create a symbol, and you include the file a second time, this time in the body of an enum, and it will assign numeric constants to all the positions of the strings. So that's a very neat little trick to quickly create.
Hold on a second. Let me interject here. Just for some of our listeners who, one, aren't C developers, or B, aren't as advanced, can you define what an enum is?
Enumeration constant. You had them in PostgreSQL where you can.
Yeah, I remember when the data type was added. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but C has enumeration constants, and it has string tables, and you can use macros in include files and redefine them to both generate your string table and define all the constants that allow you to refer to the strings symbolically. Now that's a very simple case, but there are much, much more sophisticated applications for the same technique. The notion is that you put all your data in one place in a file, and then you can include the file in different places and use the data in different ways just by defining the macros differently that wrap the data. And it is literally giving you access to a little relational database capability at compile time in C. Now, I think most of the listeners here aren't spending a lot of time using C. I was using that as a lead-in to the main value of code generation. Where code generation really shines is you define your system all in one place, and you construct a single source of truth, and then your programs, your software system references that single source of truth to create tables, forms, reports, user interfaces. Now, I think most people who are fairly well into relational databases will be familiar with this kind of concept.
Well, yeah, I was like, why would I do that in C? I can just use, I would use Postgres because it's the only one that matters, but there's hundreds of options.
Yeah, exactly. But the key point is, for code generation, what you're trying to do is build a single source of truth and then derive all the different parts of your software system from that. So from that database schema, you can generate the HTML and the JavaScript for all your forms. You can generate scripts for your reports. It can get extremely sophisticated. Nowadays, that sort of method is known as model-driven architecture. And there's a whole class of software tools and applications and businesses that have grown up around it.
Well, Django's a good example of that, right? We're at the model view controller, where with the admin interface, you can define your model and you run a script, a code generation against the model, and all of a sudden you're able to manage all of your entities via the admin interface.
Yeah. And you can go a long way just by accessing the database catalog. You can get all your tables and data types and relations and things like that, and you can generate an enormous amount from that. And if you go a step further and access all the permissions that have been defined, then you can also generate the code for access control in your user interfaces and in user applications. But there comes a point where you're really trying to get too much out of it. Then you can do things like add comments and so on, but add comments that follow a certain standard to add more information to the actual database schema. But ultimately, it becomes more productive to actually have a separate entity where all your truth is gathered, and then you actually generate your database schema. The DDL to create your database schema gets generated from that as well. When you go the extra mile with that, you can define a lot more nuanced database designs, user interface designs, for example, as well as the actual database schema, the relation. You can then give it hints about these fields should be grouped together on forms like this. Those fields should be grouped together on forms like that. And then you can reference groups of fields as entities in their own right when you're defining your interface. But it all comes back to this one single source of truth, and everything is derived from that. The SQL, the Python, the JavaScript, the HTML, you name it, there's a way to define it in a central place and extract it and generate the appropriate code, and you just maintain the code in the central place, and everything else stays in sync. It's beautiful.
I would agree that would be beautiful if that's how most people did it. But as you know, there's a whole spectrum of ways that people will make that badness. And with that,
Yes.
this has been another T3D session. Thank you so much for taking the time, Andrew. I know that you're Andrew, you're in, where are you? Philippines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of a time drift here. But again, another T3D